So, I just finished my second playthrough of Ghost of Tsushima for you guys, and I wanted to do a review of the game, breaking it down with my overly complicated rubric. Overall, I found this game a lot more enjoyable on my second playthrough. I guess I had just had more experience playing single player RPGs compared to when I first played it, and I really didn't appreciate the grandeur of some of its best qualities. Before that, I wanted to give you guys a quick rundown of how I rate games since it's a bit different from everyone else. I'll be judging the game on four categories: narrative, sensory, game design, and finally subjectivity. Under the narrative portion, we'll have plot, characters, voice acting. Under sensory, we'll have visuals and then sound. Under game design, we'll cover combat, progression, and open world, and finish off with some subjective opinions and then close it out. Each of these subcategories will be getting a score out of 10, and then we'll tally it up at the end. Now, with all of that being said, let's get right into the review. Let's start with the game's plot, which I think is very good. Jin Sakai is a samurai facing a Mughal invasion led by Khotun Khan on the island of Tsushima in the year 1274. The samurai try to defend against the Mongols in the opening scene and are absolutely destroyed, with almost all of them being brutally killed off. Jin is wounded and his uncle, the leader of Tsushima, is captured by Khan. Jin is rescued by a thief named Yuna, and after unsuccessfully trying to rescue his uncle from Castle Kaneda, resorts to using taboo, underhanded guerrilla warfare tactics such as assassinations, poison, and bombs to rescue his uncle and repel the Mongol invasion. Aside from plot, there are also side quests where Jin recruits allies into his cause and must help them through their own problems. We'll get into this later in the character section, but these side plot lines are one of my favorite parts of the game and give a lot of color and context into Jin's main quests. I have to say guys, the premise is very good. Jin has to contend between respecting the hallowed samurai traditions and doing what he must in order to repel the horror of the Mongol invasion. This doing what must be done is the game's biggest theme, a phrase first said by Jin after he stabs a Mongol in the back and is repeated by many characters throughout the story. There's even a certain beauty in Jin having to betray Lord Chimura's teachings in order to ultimately save him in Act 1. It's almost like Khotun Khan has prepared to exploit the samurai code, so Jin counters that by not even following the samurai code to begin with. The story is paced well, especially in the first two acts. After what is undeniably the greatest opening scene in video game history, Ghost of Tsushima starts hot and heavy with Jin scrambling to recruit allies and shed his old samurai ways to adopt the ghost persona. It keeps a breakneck pace until the big emotional crescendo at the end of Act 2, which leads to Jin being imprisoned for his war crime. However, it loses some points in the third act, which felt a little bit undercooked compared to the first two acts. That being said, this lackluster final act was rescued by what I consider to be some of the best endings in gaming history. Both endings for the main plot are extremely good in their own way, a feat that I've only really ever seen from like Cyberpunk or Expedition 33. However, the biggest problem I have with the plot of this game is that its lack of player agency. Going into it, I thought the playthrough would be a lot more customizable to my own playstyle, but it simply didn't turn out that way, which is like very linear. It's a problem because whether I played with the assassination style, stuck to the samurai only style, or even created a hybrid version of both with stealth archery, the plot beats fell through in the exact same way, and that was kind of disappointing. Since Jin is exposed to a lot of different fighting styles throughout the story, I thought it would have been really cool to like have multiple endings or simply have different experiences depending on how I decided to approach the game. This was the only part of the plot that I feel like was done really badly because there was a lot that could have been done here to make the game feel more immersive and player driven, instead of just giving me a single choice at the end of the game. For example, since some of the side characters introduce you to a different combat style, like Ichigawa with archery, Yuna with assassinations, Shimura and Masako with standard samurai, I would have liked it if speccing into one approach produced a different ending with that side character, depending on how you chose to drive out the Mongols. This would have been very fucking good, man, and would have given the player a lot more narrative agency while still enhancing the plot. Yes, the base plot is fantastic, and I'm not going to bash it, but I really did feel like a passenger, and that 99 of my choices didn't really matter in the end. All in all, I think Ghost of Tsushima has a great premise with phenomenal narrative resolutions that explore some profound themes across change, duty, classism, and war. While it does a lot well and has some excellent endings, it is a bit let down by the rushed pacing of Act 3 and complete lack of narrative agency for the player. So, I'll be giving this a 7 out of 10. Next, let's talk about the characters in Ghost of Tsushima. Now, the characters are one of my favorite parts about the game, and the way it introduces them is genuinely smart. After Jin realizes he can't take on Khan alone, he recruits allies one by one, each with their own crises that mirrors something Jin is going through himself. That's the efficient storytelling part of this game. Everything that the side characters are going through, Jin is also going through, whether that's survivor's guilt or being perverted by war into becoming something he's not. Everything that the side characters are going through mirrors Jin's own psyche. The game also has very, very good characterizations. You understand who everyone is within minutes, and that clarity carries the whole first act. Let's talk about the characters in particular. Norio starts as a gentle monk who ends up as someone utterly terrifying by the end of it. Ryuzen's pride isolates him until there's no one left to pull him back. Masako's vengeance hollows her out even after she gets what she wants. And Sensei Ichigawa is the most personal one for me. A man so consumed by mastery that he has nothing else, desperately adopting a student to fill the void. Shimura and Kan are both excellent in their roles. Shimura's rigidity might come off pretentious, but he's a man whose values genuinely turned the tides of battles in the past, but now he's completely blind to how those same values are being weaponized against him. Khan works because he's never a cartoon villain. He's very calculated, manipulative, and always in control, which makes him much scarier than just regular villains. He's always one step ahead of you, and it felt like, up until Act 3, the characters were trying to climb a mountain that they could never see the peak for. Ironically, I feel like the only weak link here is Jin himself. He's supposed to be a man torn apart by his transformation, but I feel like he just flips the switch and never looks back. He's carried by the rest of the supporting cast and is very understated throughout the whole game. I'm not doubting his sacrifice and his selflessness, that's what makes him truly remarkable as a protagonist, but it is fair criticism to say that he can come off a little bit detached and impersonable at times. So, as a result, I will be giving the character arcs in this game a 9 out of 10. It does a phenomenal job of taking its characters through an arc that feels earned and congruent with their initial characterization, but it drops a ball when it comes to humanizing Jin and even just making the side stories a little bit bloated. Let's wrap up the narrative section by talking about the voice acting. Now, I'm going to keep this section brief, guys. It's just a straight up 10 out of 10. I played with the Japanese voice acting with English subtitles and it was a straight up banger. I've listened to some of the English version and I have to say it's nowhere near as good as the Japanese version. The ending scenes especially did not nearly hit as hard as from the English version. Whether it's Jin's solemn convictions, Shimura's dignified traditionalism, Masako's rage, or Yuna's shiftiness, the Japanese voice actors do a remarkable job of portraying the characters' dominant traits and place within the story using their voice. Anyone who's watched anime knows how crazy Japanese voice acting can be, and I was so glad to experience it firsthand through a video game. Jin, for all of the problems I mentioned that he had from the last section, is voiced by the same guy as Zoro from One Piece, and he delivers an absolutely magnetic performance that kind of upsells Jin as a character. The voice acting is kind of weird because he's not written as well as he's acted, which I think is a bit hilarious. Now, with the narrative section out of the way, let's move on to the sensory portion of the review, and we'll start with visuals first. Now, it's no secret that the visuals are the best part of Ghost of Tsushima. From the opening scene, it feels less like a video game and more like an interactive IMAX movie. The attention to detail is phenomenal. Combat effects are smooth and carry just enough of that anime feel without making the game feel like a fantasy. The choreography of some of the boss fights are extremely well detailed and are somehow cinematic but also real time at the same time, which is crazy. The facial capture during emotional moments, especially when it comes to Shimura, is genuinely realistic and heart-wrenching. But I have to say, guys, the standout visuals come from the game's sweeping shot of its gorgeous landscapes. The open fields, overlooks on the horizon, the beautiful gold and red leaves. It's fucking crazy how Ghost of Tsushima achieves visual diversity without ever leaving the island, which is honestly such impressive design efficiency. It feels like you're being transported across different worlds every time you move on to a new area. But in reality, you're still in the island. The environmental diversity is just that good that it makes you feel like you're transporting between different worlds like it was God of War or something. I'm telling you guys, like, there's so many times I forgot what I was doing because a view just stopped me like dead in my tracks. I was constantly pulling out photo mode because some of these shots were just fucking breathtaking. All in all, guys, the game's visuals is like, it goes toe to toe with Red Dead Redemption 2 or Expedition 33, which are some of the other visual masterpieces that I've played. So, easy 10 out of 10. No questions asked. The second part of the sensory category is music, or just sound in general. Now, the sound in Ghost of Tsushima is generally good, but it's a bit flawed in its execution. What I mean by that is that the game really does have good music and really good VFX, but the sound engineering is a bit off, so it can come off a little bit too soft or a little bit too loud at times. I really didn't want to take points off of this, guys, but it happened enough times where it wasn't just simply a random bug, and it did disrupt my gaming experience. Now, the game features traditional Japanese flute tracks fused with orchestral symphonies, which really comes alive during the combat. Whether it's random quick-time events, big sieges, or boss fights, going into a big battle with the fast-paced Japanese flutes really does get your blood pumping, and the game nails this aspect of immersion. The atmospheric scoring is also very good. It creates this almost meditative feel as you ride around, as if Jin is rethinking his life decisions to become the ghost, or even plotting his next move against the Khan. However, again, it can come off a little bit too quiet at times, which is a problem with the sound mixing. I also think the atmospheric scoring is a little bit underused, and there are too many patches within the open world where there is no atmospheric sound at all whatsoever, which personally I'm not a big fan of. I will say though, the game's VFX sounds are absolutely top notch. Whether it's wind blowing through the grass, the clash of swords, or Mongols choking on their own blood during assassinations, the sound engineering for VFX noises was done especially well. Like I said before, the visuals are so good that the game can come off a little bit too fantastic at times, so this kind of immersive VFX is really good for anchoring that experience to old Japan. So, all in all guys, despite its sound mixing problems, I still think Ghost of Tsushima has generally good music and BGM, so I'll be giving this a 7 out of 10. Alright guys, that's sensory out of the way, now we're going to move on to game design. And the first one up is combat. Now, the combat in Ghost of Tsushima is simply incredible. Genuinely one of the most satisfying combat system I've ever experienced, aside from like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. The feel of it is the first thing you notice. Every swing, every parry, every dodge flows like water. Jin's character control is tight and enemy locking is responsive, which leads to the flow of combat having this buttery smooth feeling to it that makes you feel like you're a highly skilled samurai weaving through blades. The stance system in Ghost of Tsushima is the centerpiece of the melee combat. Different stances to break through different enemy types, heavy attacks to crack their guard, and it all clicks together in a way that feels intuitive rather than like mechanical and gimmicky. It honestly has a Sekiro style feel to it, but I would actually argue it's even better than Sekiro, which is basically like spamming the parry button over and over again. Ghost of Tsushima combat is a lot more fluid and diverse, and the excellent combat cinematography only enhances the immersion here. The ghost weapons are honestly a little bit overpowered. I wish they would have been a little bit less overpowered or just more rare to find in the open world, because it honestly does feel like a little bit overkill sometimes. I feel like you could only be using ghost weapons when you're getting overwhelmed by Mongols and you have to AoE them down, but otherwise they're honestly overkill and they just make the game a little bit boring in my opinion. But from a combat approach, the game does a good job of supporting different builds. You can run a mostly samurai approach, built around standoffs and regenerating health once you break through enemy stances. Ghost is obviously the canonical approach, where you're building more for quick assassinations, multi-assassinations with reduced enemy detect, supplemented by obviously the overpowered ghost weapons and the eventual ghost stance. During my second playthrough, I actually discovered a stealth archery approach, almost like a mix between samurai and ghost ideals. And honestly, I think this would have made a brilliant middle ground thematically and narratively, but again, the story simply doesn't support different endings based off of different combat styles, which I think is such a missed opportunity and my biggest gripe with this game. I obviously discussed this earlier in the plot section. Aside from that, guys, the only real gripe I have with the combat system are the boss fights. Now, I didn't actually notice them during my first playthrough because of boss fights from like a sensory level, from music and visuals are just fucking perfect. But what I discovered was that the boss fights really don't have much depth to them. This is where games like Sekiro actually outshine Ghost of Tsushima, because you can play it really passively and reactively in most boss fights and just spam heavies and get through most of them pretty quickly. I feel like the boss combos are also not the hardest to react to. It's like a combination of dodges and parries, and you'll eventually get your chance to break their guard and just spam away special skills or just spam heavies. That's honestly what I did. I just spammed heavies, blocked and parried, and then like spammed a special ability when I could. The combat depth didn't really hold up to the visual design and the music design, so unfortunately I have to take off a point there. And it gets knocked down from a perfect score to a 9 out of 10. Moving on from combat, let's look at the open world in Ghost of Tsushima. The world design itself is genuinely impressive here. Everything from the authentic Japanese architecture and costumes to the expansive landscapes, this game does a terrific job of bringing you into Tsushima. There's even times where NPCs get up and bow to Jin as he walks by, because he's a nobility, which I thought was like a really nice touch when it comes to like NPC interactions. The world design here is like absolutely fantastic. The only thing I would say is a bit of a negative is that the open world feels a little bit too sheen. Like there's like a little bit too much sheen here, to the point where the island feels like a bit of a fantasy instead of like a real island. And this is different from like the views and the hotspots and everything. The actual feel of the island comes off a little bit plastic. Now, I don't know whether that's the color grading or the lack of particles or whatever, but for instance, the ground or the surrounding environments don't have the same realism of something like Red Dead Redemption 2, for instance. It would have been fine if this was like a fantastical land, but this is like Japan in the 1200s, so like that was a little bit off for me. It felt like a little bit too fantastic. One thing I really liked about the open world was the side character quest lines. They are done extremely well. Each of them have their own unique story and character arcs with their own unique message pertaining to Jin and the players at large. The legendary skill quests are also equally compelling, each with their own backstory and stakes and payoffs. I also really like how the wind guides the navigation. There's no like minimap or anything. It's just you sort of slide your finger on the touchpad and the wind blows in the direction where you should go in. I think that mechanic is just genuinely genius, and it's the first time I've seen it implemented in a video game before. The activities you can do range from stuff like fox shrines, bamboo strikes, and hot springs to beef up your stats, random quick time events where you can save NPCs from Mongols and then accept like basic fetch quests from the NPCs, and then finally like liberating cities and villages that are occupied by Mongols. There's also haiku spots where the game intentionally slows down and gives you a chance to breathe in the beauty of the game and Japanese culture before you throw yourself back into action, which I really liked. It's like a nice like reset switch before you go back in. There's also other like aesthetic pickups you can get, like to like give your sword a new skin or whatever, which I thought was kind of cool too. But the problem is this kind of side content gets stale really fast. I mean, I'm talking about like after the first act. I was expecting to do a lot more interactive side content, but even at the third act, it was just more following foxes and finding hot springs. It sucks because I really want to interact with this gorgeous world that they've built, but I can't because there's nothing else to do other than take on another NPC quest or find some fucking fox shrine on the ass end of some mountain. For instance, when you liberate a fort that's been taken over by the Mongols, the game automatically repairs it and people just like randomly move into it. Instead of that, I would have liked some kind of like base building minigame where with each stronghold that you take back from the Mongols, you slowly direct citizens to them and build up the resistance against the invasion. This would have been a lot more immersive because right now the open world just feels a little bit too detached from the main story. Like Jin is just like doing random shit exploring the world and the game only locks in when he goes back to the main quest. Overall, the game gets major points for creating the open world with gorgeous and authentic design and its fabulous side character quest design, but ultimately, the open world content is very basic and very limited for its time. It's never a good thing when players literally can't spend time in the great world you've created because there's nothing else to do other than a bunch of basic bitch activities. Overall, the open world is just kind of average and easily the most disappointing part of Ghost of Tsushima, so it gets a 5 out of 10. And finally, for the game design category, we'll be talking about progressions and systems. The progression starts off very good and carries nicely into the mid-game. There's no obnoxious anywhere in the game, and you can just simply progress by doing quests and exploring this beautiful world, which I thought was a really nice design touch. The skill tree is also done well for the most part. While I thought some of the later upgrades for parry and dodges were kind of underpowered, stuff like stance moves, multi-assassinations, and augmenting your ghost weapons felt really good. The problem is that the pacing of the upgrades are badly calibrated, which becomes a real problem in the late game actually. You accumulate everything too quickly and XP becomes functionally meaningless towards the end of like mid-game, which means that the ceiling is reached far too quickly and you sort of lose out on that RPG progression going into late game. Now, I will say the game systems are very immersive and they do a very good job of painting Jin as this one-man army. He's constantly heralded as a savior, and as the game progresses, you can literally feel the weight of the whole island on his shoulders and his actions changing the tide bit by bit. As much as I complained about the liberation of the forts not having a minigame attached to them with like base building and stuff like that, the actual experience of picking off an entire battalion one by one is genuinely riveting and adds to the thematic mystique of the Ghost. Speaking of Ghost, I thought the Ghost stance was like kind of disappointing honestly. I feel like it was developed for its badass reveal during the story, but I feel like it sucks as a standalone ability used outside of that context. I thought if Jin had an ultimate ability, it would be something like the assassination combo or some kind of buff that plays on his speed and undetectability. Instead, it ended up being just like a insta one-shot with an AoE fear, which I feel like is more of a samurai ability than a fucking ghost ability. And finally guys, as far as like the general economy is concerned, it's pretty dog shit, let me tell you. The game is very streamlined, so while that's a good thing when it comes to stuff like grinding, you don't have to grind as much, the game respects your time, but after a certain point, it just feels like a lack of depth. After Act 2, I expected there to be a game mechanic where you can poison the Mongols' food and like clear them out that way, sort of like how you do in KCD, but there was none of that. There was no real sword progression other than just like stat upgrades, which was like very like meh, it was just like kind of boring honestly. And there was no other like creative usage of the environment to add more combat depth or nothing like that either. For a man that's single-handedly dismantling a Mongol invasion, I felt like Jin was operating on like a surprisingly thin toolkit, and he didn't really have much to work with other than like overpowered ghost weapons, which I was like, I don't know, like I feel like this game could have used from like a lot more combat depth from like a system standpoint. I think overall, the progression is really good up until Act 3, and you can successfully live out different playstyles within the same playthrough, Archer, Ghost, or Samurai, which is a really nice touch. But ultimately, this game is overshadowed by a lack of late game content, lack of combat and progression depth, and a very undercooked game economy. So, I'll be giving this a 5 out of 10. Alright guys, I'm going to fuse the final category into one. With all the objective ratings out of the way, let's talk a little bit about how I personally felt playing the game. And I mean, the game is just an absolute treat. If I could sum up Ghost of Tsushima in one word, it'd be gorgeous. From the visuals to the combat to the fabulous side quests that have no business being as good as it is, Ghost of Tsushima is quite literally so hard to put down. I spent so much time not even progressing the main quest, but going through all the side quests and putting myself in as much combat as I could throw myself into because they were just simply an amazingly immersive experience. Even for games that came after it, like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, don't achieve the same level of immersion without being somewhat clunky and buggy in the process. Ghost of Tsushima really nails the atmospheric immersion that you expect without compromising on the user experience. However, despite all of its strengths, it can feel a little bit empty at times, especially during the open world. They did a good job of delivering on the basics like visuals and combat, but the game frequently doesn't have a lot of depth when it comes to its backend systems and stuff like that. It's never really a good thing when the player falls in love with the world, but feels annoyed when they can't interact with it as much as they want to because there's nothing really much to do without it being painfully repetitive. That's just not good game design, and I didn't enjoy that aspect of it. Also, another small nitpick I have is how tedious the armor swapping is. For a game that's very streamlined and very good about not wasting the player's time, not having an easy preset loadout for assassin, samurai, archer, and just free roam playstyles was extremely annoying. I mean, I hate to do this, but I have to dock a point because I had to swap back and forth between armor sets over and over again. So, all in all, it gets a 9 out of 10 for grindiness. It generally respects the player's time, so no issues there, and it gets a 9 out of 10 for enjoyability. So that brings it up to 18 out of 20 for the subjective category. Now that we have all the final scores, let's tally them up. For plot, 7 out of 10. For characters, 9 out of 10. Voice acting, 10 out of 10. Visuals, 10 out of 10. Sound, 7 out of 10. Combat, 9 out of 10. Open world, 5 out of 10. Progression and systems, 5 out of 10. Grindiness, 9 out of 10. And enjoyability, 9 out of 10. So that comes out to a score of 82 out of 100, which is exceptional in my opinion. Overall, guys, I think Ghost of Tsushima is simply an amazing gaming experience. It does the basics as well as any game in history. The visuals, the combat, the plot, and the characters are done very well, and they form the backbone of this game and drive the player experience. They do their job so well that it actually hides the game's lack of depth in more than one area, but I think people are willing to overlook it simply because of how amazing the game looks and how smooth the combat is. They came here to play a samurai transitioning to an assassin, and they 100% get that experience. If you guys stayed watching for this long, I'd really appreciate a like to help boost the video to other people. I'll be coming out with more gaming reviews in addition to my general life insights content, so make sure to subscribe to stay tuned to that. If you guys have any questions or problems with my rating system, leave it below in the comments. I respond to every single one of them. If you guys haven't watched it already, I'll leave up my Witcher 3 review here so you can peruse it at your own leisure. That's it from me in this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.